season 2011-12 was one of the most incredible seasons in the history of Scottish football, with the death of one of our largest clubs. The 10 seasons that followed were an amazing 10 years in the history of Celtic Football Club, with 4 consecutive trebles, one of which was an invincible treble. And it all ended with a worldwide pandemic that resulted in a worldwide lockdown. This is the fans' story and the fans' recollection of those incredible seasons. You can listen to it every week if you're a paid subscriber to theceltigunderground.substack.com. We hope you enjoy.
Music in my head, crazy music playing in the morning light. Oh, ho, ho, it's magic, you know.
So this is the 9th season of 9 in a row. We are going to do a 10th. And we're very lucky because Robert has flown in especially for this, flown in from Singapore just to mark this occasion of the 9th season. And Andrew is being a stalwart here, and he's doing it from the car. So the only thing, I was saying this to Robert just before we started, the only thing that I realised would be an issue here is normally when I'm doing this, we have the laptop and I have the season on my iPad. And so I'd always had in my head when we came here that I would then just have the season on my laptop so I could scroll through it. And it was only when I was setting up that I suddenly thought, no, because Andrew's going to be in the laptop. So I'm going to have to be doing this principally note-free. So the only notes that I've got are
deaths and
well, not even the deaths. I can be bored getting the deaths, actually, is the honest thing. Number one, when the European season kicked off, was Ed Sheeran. Number one, when the league campaign kicked off, was Sabrina Carpenter, and I've no idea if she's connected to the Karen and Richard. Probably not. And films, again, no. It's like I was saying, it's the same films that come around because it's Captain Marvel, one of the Marvel films, Star Wars episode 9, and Frozen 2. So it's the same stuff that comes over. So you, Robert, were pointing out, I do have notes, but they're all on my phone. You, Robert, were pointing out before we started recording this that there's quite a lot to discuss in this season, even from the pre-season before, because obviously we don't know it's going to be a curtailed season. So we're going for 9 in a row, and we have a bit of an issue with Lee Griffiths going into this summer. So who can remember what the issues were with Lee Griffiths?
There was always an issue with Lee Griffiths.
No, I think this was his mental health. Like, I think that was the there was still, he came back, but he came back, I think, roughly about the start of this season, maybe not quite at the start, but this was his mental health issues at that time. They were still.
Yeah, I think the overweight problem was the next season.
That's the next season. And then the texts to underage girls is the season to come after that.
Yeah.
So Lee Griffiths,
because
part of the exhilarating aspect of this season was the way he dovetailed with Odds and Edward. They were absolutely lacerating teams at one stage during the season. The two of them had a tremendous partnership. I remember I kept having to write about it in every kind of match report because they were just destroying teams right up to when COVID hit. That was Lee Griffiths, the game before COVID hit, Lee Griffiths scored a hat-trick against St Mirren in a 5-0 home win against St Mirren. So he was very much back in good fettle for this season.
Yeah, I think the preamble to the season was that Neil Lennon had been given the job.
Yep.
On a permanent basis, and we lost Michael Lustig from someone who had done a major role in the first 8 titles, and we lost Kieran Tierney as well, and we got £25 million was the reported fee for Tierney, which was a record for a transfer from the Scottish Premier League. And I think it was a pretty good price. And because he was already showing some signs of fragility and getting injured on a quite a regular basis. So it was a massive loss. Tierney, for various reasons, as we'll discover over the next couple of seasons. But we did have to go out and buy replacements. And initially, I think the purchases that Neil Lennon made was Hatem El Hamed, the Israeli, came in, with a kind of right back, possible centre back role, and Bolly Bolingoli was the left back replacement for Tierney, and he also signed Christopher Julian for £7 million as a centre half. So the rest of the team was still largely Brendan Rodgers' side, but the defence was having to be restructured, and even more so as we got to the transfer window, and we signed Fraser Forster on loan. We signed two more right backs, Jeremy Frimpong and Moritz Bauer. And we signed another left back in Greg Taylor. So basically we'd signed a lot of defenders by the time the window closed, but we hadn't signed enough of them by the time we got to the serious end of the European qualifiers.
We also signed Patrick Klamala for £3.5 million.
Yep.
So yeah, Frimpong and Mohamed Elyounoussi, who we'd been after for quite some time, we signed him on loan, and we signed Fraser Forster on loan as well. So, I mean, there was an element of, it was a lot of defensive players brought in, as you say, Julian and Bolingoli. I remember having a conversation with someone at Celtic about El Hamed, who I said, what we do in signing, it's not as if Israel's a boom place for elite players. What we do in signing, I think he was 28, or he was 26 or 28, but I remember saying, what we signing a guy who's twice been to Europe and failed and gone home within 18 months? Why? And he's whatever age he was, 26, 27, 28, somewhere in that band. I just couldn't see the logic in it. And I was assured that his homesickness issues had gone away. Didn't seem to go that way. So Champions League qualifying, we start off Sarajevo, where we have a comfortable 3-1 away. We go 1-0 down, but then make it 3-1 away. And then home at Celtic Park, so we're obviously 3-1. We score to make it, so 4-1 on aggregate, goes 1-0. Then they equalise to make it 1 each. And Callum McGregor makes it 2-1, so we go through 5-2 in aggregate. Then we're playing, I just have no, it's interesting, some of the games that you just have no memory of.
Is this Nom Calju?
Nom Calju. I have no memory. We won 5-0 at Celtic Park and 2-0 away, so 7-0 in aggregate, but I just have no memory whatsoever.
Pink strip, that's the only thing I recall. It was a really unusual looking pink outfit.
And then we had Cluj, which we proved actually the issue here started to be psychological, because I remember watching Cluj and thinking, if they were in the Premier League, cast iron, we would finish ahead of them in the league. We are so much of a better team. We won 2-1 away. Sorry, we drew 1-1 away. So we're reasonably comfortable coming back to Celtic Park. And then just absolutely blew it.
There was a pattern emerging here, because there was a lot of these games away from home. We did enough to win, but we didn't win. It happened again at Maribor. It happened later in the season against Copenhagen. Yes. We were a dominant team. We were playing really well. And I remember after the game thinking, we should have won that. And if you had won it, then you almost guarantee getting through, barring a disaster. And when they come back to Celtic Park for the second leg, I think people were anticipating, a Celtic victory. But the really frustrating thing here is, again, we were getting put out in the third qualifying round. There was a round against, and a further round to come, and it was Slavia Prague. So we weren't even getting to things were getting so bad, we weren't even getting to the last qualifying round. We were getting put out before it.
And we were, what was it? We were 3-2 up against Cluj at Celtic Park.
76 minutes on the clock.
Yeah, 76 minutes.
And we had Julian on the bench, so there was a bit of controversy about the selection for that game because Neil Lennon said Julian wasn't fit enough to start, and Bolingoli got dropped because he'd made a quite uninspiring start to the season. So Callum McGregor was asked to play left back in that game, and we lost a goal in the first half where McGregor got out-jumped at the back post, and Scott Bain should have done better. But, in the second half we came storming back, and, we were 2-1 up, we were 3-2 up. I think Scott Brown conceded a terrible penalty in the second half. And at 3-2 up, we should have either bring on Near Beton or you bring on Julian and you just try and see the game out. But I think we'd been attacking with such verve in the second half that I think we just tried to keep going, and we'd lost the lead. They equalised with 10 minutes to go and then got another one. And it was a bad night, I think, for Scott Bain. It was a bad night for the fullbacks, and I think that then led to that flurry of transfer activity to try and plug those gaps. But catastrophic night,
It was, and you're watching them thinking we're not very good. And Andrew, Robert just touched on something there, that we were getting into this dreadful cycle of we're holding off to see if we qualify for the Champions League so we can spend Champions League level money at the Champions League level. But it then became a self-fulfilling prophecy. So what we do is we don't sign anyone. We get knocked out by Cluj, which then demonstrates how weak the squad is. So we go out and sign people. And I think that's what made it even more infuriating, that you're sitting there thinking, but if you just made some of those signings before we played Cluj in times for the European transfer deadline, we'd have beaten Cluj because they weren't very good.
But I suppose
we ended up beating them.
The same season. But what happens is then that you're a season out of sync. I used to always say that if you wanted to sign anybody for Champions League qualifiers, I've probably said it in one of the earlier podcasts of these 9 rows, you have to sign them the very latest January. You have to settle in. You shouldn't be settling in. As I think I made the point about how Van Dijk had a poor kind of qualifying Champions League, a qualifying campaign, European campaign. You don't necessarily, not many players hit the ground running. Their first few games will be Champions League qualifiers. That's not when you can expect them to be at their best. So it was, as you say, it's almost like you're chasing it. You're chasing it. You think, well, we'll get these players in and then next year will be better. Next year will go better. The last 15 minutes of that game, it was completely scatty that night. It was a team that just weren't playing with their heads. Celtic, that is, as Robert says, when they went 3-2 up, because they weren't very good, Cluj. And of course, this was one of the last occasions where it was because when it went to 3 each, it was like, oh, we're out in the away goals. We're out in the away goals. So then it went to 4-3, where it was like 97 minutes or something, they made it 4-3. But because that away goals, it would be totally different now when you think about it, because the away goals don't matter. So even when they lost that third goal, they wouldn't lose heart the same way they did that night. It was like, what have we done? You could tell it. It was not just, wasn't quite the same scoreline, but there was an element of the old Partizan Belgrade game that Cluj night.
Was it Dan Petrescu who was the manager?
Yes.
He'd already beaten Rangers at Ibrox a few years before it quite convincingly. And he made
I was there that night. That was a great night. 4-1. Well ran down. We were all late because we had all problems with our computers. So there wasn't any print journalists in when Walter Smith come up, and nobody asked him any questions. Chick Young kind of soft-balled him a few questions. Oh, very disappointing, Walter. Nobody got to the nub of it. You've just lost 4-1 to a team that don't even have any supporters. They actually let people into their games free. It was just some kind of project to one of these kind of magnet guy, ship magnet guys or something like that over. And they don't even exist anymore, that team. It was they only existed for a couple of years. He had a great idea. Just let people in for free. I'll pay for all the costs. And then, of course, he gets bored and the team ceased to be. Two of those teams that night ceased to be.
One thing I remember at the time was that there's this story that you hear that the first occasion where Moravcik played in training, the Celtic players were blown away because obviously when it comes to peer pressure, when a player for the first time trains with his teammates, you've got to make a good impression. So the famous one is Lubo just blew everybody. The Celtic players were in awe of the talent that Lubo had. And the reverse of that is, so I heard, was the ball and goalie played, and the players were absolutely astonished at how poor this guy was. And that's why I believe that we ran out and get Greg Taylor in the last day of the window, because it was such a worry that we can't go a full season with this guy playing left back. But we need to have a plan B to some degree, and the plan B basically was Greg Taylor as an emergency stopgap signing.
Yeah,
because he was so bad amongst his teammates.
Yeah, I think Bolingoli reminded.
Yeah.
Bolingoli reminded me of Mo Kamara, that played left back in one of Gordon Strachan's teams. You know, he's kind of full of, too many touches and, try to do things in a hurry. No composure, really.
So, So we're out of the Champions League and we're in, as you say, Saint, there's still one more qualifying. So we drop into the Europa League. We still have a Europa League qualifying. And it demonstrated again the element of, I think we were starting to get a psychological barrier about the amount of pressure of going into Champions League games, because we play AIK Stockholm and we win 2-0 at Celtic Park and 4-1 away. We just blow them away 4-1. So we go through 6-1. And I don't think they were dramatically different in quality to Cluj, that team.
Sure.
But it wasn't in the Champions League. So we're through to the Europa League group stages. Anybody any particular memory about that, Ty?
About
this game against AIK?
Not so much the AIK, but the one I did want to speak about was the Sarajevo one, because that was the first tie. It was in July, I think. These games get early and early. And I remember that they looked very much like a Hearts team. They were in maroon and white, and they were very, very physical. But were you in Sarajevo, Andrew? Well, the point I was going to make was, normally you play these teams in that first game, and with the greatest respect, that they're not a great opposition. They don't even have a particularly big stadium. But that I think in Sarajevo held about 40,000, and they were noisy. And they took the lead, and for about 15 minutes you're sitting there thinking, surely we're not going to get put out in the first qualifying round of the Champions League, because for about 10 minutes it was ropey. And then Mikey Johnson actually scored a cracking goal. Around about that period was the period, I think, that we all hoped that Mikey Johnson would kick on and be the next big thing. Sadly, it didn't happen. But round about that time, July, August, September, he did have a real good run in the team.
He did, and he scored again in the game in Stockholm.
Yep.
Which I think we got a couple of late goals to make it even more comfortable. But I was at the game at Parkhead, and it was a good win. You're always a bit slightly concerned playing teams from Scandinavia who are 20, 25 games into their season if you get them too early. But I thought we did a good job. And but yeah, the Cluj thing was a disaster, quite honestly. And, we were definitely better than them if we got the right team out with the right tactics.
As we proved later. But then we start getting the signings in and we start the league campaign and we are banging goals in. As you said, we start the 7-0 against St Johnstone with a Ryan Christie hat-trick. Mikey Johnson opens the scoring and Cham Edward 5-2 against Motherwell, and their second goal was in the 91st minute. So, and then 3-1 against Hearts, where again it's a late goal for them. And then we go to Ibrox, where we beat Rangers 2-0. This is one of my favourite tales about the impact of streaming in football, because I'm watching it with my dad, but we're watching it on a stream, so it's obviously running a wee bit late, and my phone is on silent. But they have a corner. The thing I remember about it is they had a corner, and suddenly my phone just starts going with people just saying yes, yes, and all this stuff, and they get a corner, and we go to clear it, and I say to my dad, I think we're going to break up the park and score here. It's like, how do you know?
Nostradamus.
I was like, I just got a feeling they've got so many people up for this corner. And I think we cleared it and then it went back in, and I'm thinking, oh no, because I didn't think the stream was this far behind as it was. And then we go up the pitch, and it's through, and it's Edward that's cleaned through. And then by this point, I'd seen that Hayes scores, and I'm thinking, but wait a minute, Edward's going to score here. And then he doesn't. He gets saved and Hayes puts in the back of the net. And my dad's like, wow, you called that one? That's amazing. To this day, I mean, he won't be listening to this. To this day, he's never known that the reason, I mean, he won't remember now. The reason I got that right is just because I was watching a stream. But, you know, we really start the season hitting the ground running. As you said, Robert, we're banging in goals.
Played great football. I think that game at Ibrox, I think that might have been Fraser Forster's return.
It was.
Yep.
And I know that the next day after losing that game, because I think Rangers had also started with a couple of 2 or 3 victories, but they went out and bought Ryan Kent the day after losing to us at Ibrox, and which was quite a big investment for Rangers at that time. It was a lot of money. But yeah, it was a brilliant start to the season. I think we won several games before we had a blip. I think Easter Road was the first game we didn't win.
Yep.
And then I don't know whether it was game 7 or game 8, we went to Livingston and lost. And Chris Julian got a really hard time from a certain Lyndon Dykes in that game. So
and Fraser Forster made a mess of one of their goals as well. We just didn't seem, they were just, as you say, they were just physical. And I think just so many of our players, the newer players that had come in, playing on this crap pitch with a team who were just had no footballing ability, but were just exceptionally physical, just seemed to be a complete culture shock to them.
See, getting back to the Fraser Forster thing, we were having trouble with goalkeepers at that point. I don't think Scott Bain did himself any favours in the qualifiers, and Craig Gordon was out of favour as well. But I remember watching it at Ibrox, and before the game, the angle it gave you was looking towards the goal, and Fraser Forster was in the goal, and he outstretched his arms to touch the bar. And I remember thinking, my God, look at the size of him filling that goal. He was enormous.
Yeah.
I'd very rarely seen a goalkeeper who filled the space in the goals as much. And it actually gave me great reassurance, because I thought, I'm glad he's back. Because he was good the first time round. But just look, what a specimen for a goalkeeper. He was huge. And I think that gave the whole team a boost that day, just because he physically was behind the defence. And that was the reason for victory.
I always felt that was also why Fraser Forster was good at penalty kicks. I always felt Rab Douglas was good at penalty kicks as well, because they made themselves look huge.
Intimidating.
Which I think sometimes that's the reason why people missed penalties against Rab Douglas. He didn't sometimes save them, they missed them. I think if the goalkeeper looks huge, they try harder to put it right in the corner, and then are more likely to miss as a consequence. And you're right. I mean, I think Fraser Forster, he just fills that goal and just so intimidated people.
Fraser Forster must be
Andrew,
one of the few. He must be one of the few players that signed on for Celtic 3 separate occasions, because essentially he had 2 separate loan moves, and then he signed permanently. There's not many players have done that, guys.
True. Was that the game at Ibrox?
Celtic were written off, as always it happens at the start of the season. Rangers start well. Celtic were completely written off, because if you remember Lennon's post-match, he was saying people should have greater respect. It was one of those ones. They should have greater respect for this team. The way they were talking before this game, it's greater respect. I know what my team are.
Was it the game Jordan Jones got sent off at the end for wiping out Moritz Bauer over on the right flank?
Yeah. The man with the huge throw-in. Do you remember Morris Bauer's throw-ins?
Yeah.
That was his spirit. It was almost
that was the only thing that was impressive about him. So.
He didn't feature much.
He didn't feature much.
Jordan Jones got himself very badly in that, though.
I think he did get injured.
He did,
for the whole season, I think.
No, not quite the whole season. was a real sin for that guy, because he was, what a guy he was. You know, the first time I remember we spoke to him, he was talking about playing piano and all this. He was just one of these, like, he was a kind of Alistair Johnson of his day, you know. He was just so warm and so friendly, and he would talk to you about anything. So he was in terms of the guys in the media, like, he was a big miss, you know. It was like, oh no, you want this guy to succeed, you want to be speaking to him every couple of weeks, you know. He'd lost to say for himself. My boy,
So as you
the Gaelic school, and I used to see him run, because he was staying in a hotel, but he obviously went for runs right round, you know, kind of Berkeley Street area and all that in Glasgow.
So as you said, Robert, we had the blip when we drew with Hibs, which was, I think it was an Ayer own goal. And then we lose to Livingston in that battle where we can't cope with the physicality. And then we go on a winning run until New Year. I think we win every game after the Livingston tie until we get to New Year and lose at Celtic Park. So we've gone to Ibrox and won, and then we go and lose at Celtic Park 2-1. Well, I think it was like 29th of December, I think, that game. So, Andrew, do you have any memories of that tie?
Yeah.
Or that period, those run of games where we're winning every week?
They were just in a groove. They were in a groove, and if you look at it, and you can see it from the actual stats, but it was like Edward, Griffiths and Christie, you know, that they were just regularly finding the net. They were just regularly kind of doing a number on teams. I mean, it wasn't necessarily huge ones. A few of them were just 2-goal wins or two. But, you know, they were certainly very much in their groove. And as we know, like from what was happening in Europe, that was almost feeding into the domestic scene, because they were on such a high coming into some of these domestic games. It wasn't like the tiredness or whatever. It was just a team that felt good about itself. That's what you kind of realise. It was a team that felt good about yourself. And people, you got to remember, were thinking, wasn't he quite working the same way with Rodgers? This is when people were saying, oh no, this is why Lennon's come back. Because he can get a tune out of this team, and he's making this team better than it was latterly under Rodgers.
So the interesting thing is, I remember doing a podcast around this time with someone, can't remember who it was, but coaching person. And I was making that point that you just made, Andrew, about how it was almost like the perfect mix of the style of Rodgers, but it was just a bit more direct. And this person, maybe this is a foretelling of what was to come the following season, because this person was like, I wouldn't be as positive as you about this. This was off the podcast. I was like, why is that? He said, do you know how Everton have gone from the really defensive style of Moyes, and for the first 4 or 5 months when they played under Martinez, everybody was loving the football, but then they started to dislike the football because they started to lose every week. He said that's because in the first period, they were retaining the defensiveness of Moyes, but adding a wee bit of the extra attackingness of Martinez. And this guy was saying, so my concern is the majority of the players are still retaining some of the coaching discipline that Brendan Rodgers has and the system, but it's just gradually fading away. And then it's not that we're being more that we've still got that and a bit more direct. I'm just looking at a team that's losing its cohesion. And so in the intervening period, it's just looking like there's lots of flair to it, but it'll eventually fall apart. That was what I remember, because I remember dismissing it and saying, no, I was wrong about Celtic. They have appointed the right manager. This is all the right thing. And as we'll see later, maybe this guy had a bit of a point. So that was his thing. Anybody else to talk about that Livingston through to New Year period,
well,
and then the defeat at
the game I
Rangers?
remember was at Pittodrie when we were 4 up by half time.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely brilliant. Even Bolingoli had a very good game that day. And the other one I remember was the Hamilton-Accies at home, which was a Wednesday night game. And I was at it. It was just 2 or 3 days before the League Cup final. And we didn't play well at all that night. And we were winning 1-0. Yep. Hamilton-Accies scored in the 90th minute.
Yep.
And of course, it was very tight at the top because Rangers are more or less matching our results.
They were at Pittodrie that night.
They were at Pittodrie, threw away a 2-goal lead, actually. And, in the 93rd minute or something, Scott Brown scored the winner. And it was kind of unusual to see such joy at a game against Hamilton Accies. But I think, it was a vital 3 points. And, we got away with it.
I remember being raging that night when Hamilton scored, because I felt we had gone one up and then were playing as if we knew that they were massively beneath us in quality.
Yeah.
But instead of scoring the second, third and fourth goal and then farting around, we just farted around. And I remember when they equalised, one of the few times I was really angry at our players. I thought they'd been unprofessional that night because they had not won the game before deciding to pack up their tools for the evening. And then when Hamilton equalised, it was almost as if we went, I suppose we're going to have to score a second, and just went up the park and scored.
Hamilton had a couple of chances before they equalised.
Yeah, it was coming.
So I think a lot of it was sort of set piece delivery, and which was a bit of a theme for Celtic, around this period, that even though we had gigantic guys like Christopher Julian and Christopher Ayer, we still struggled in a lot of games just with simple balls into the box. So, Hamilton were impressive.
Hamilton were impressive. But
so
it was essentially, because it was almost like it was there at one point Celtic were drawing and Rangers were winning? Would there have been that point? Because it was almost like
Rangers were 2 up. Rangers were 2 up at Pittodrie, and
I'm just wondering when Aberdeen scored their second, their equaliser. When did they make it 2-2?
I don't think it was that late.
Was it not that late? No. Because I was just wondering if it was almost like a 4-point swing there. It's like say Celtic looks as if they're going to drop 2 points, and Rangers therefore would make up to the 2 points, but then it flipped round it. They lost 2 points, so that swung 4 points.
It was a 4-point swing.
It's an indication when the two teams play together how exciting it can be. Because very, very rarely these days do we get a situation where we kick off at the same time.
Yep.
And there can be a response, because it's yin and yang. If one team goes 2-0 up and it's nothing each, then there's a sort of pressure to get a goal. Now, that was commonplace back in the day when everybody kicked off at 3 o'clock on a Saturday, but you very rarely get that now. But the one thing I was going to say there was that autumnal period running up to Christmas, Frimpong was absolutely exceptional. It's very rarely you see a young guy coming in and making an impression like that. And there's also the argument as well about how fast he was. We've had Didi Agath, with Craig Bellamy, we've got Dyson Maeda, and you've got Frimpong, and there's always that debate about who do you think would win a race, because every one of them was exceptionally quick.
Yeah.
So I'd have to go with Dyson for any of these, made-up competitions.
So we lose Celtic Park to Rangers going into the new year. So any memories of that game?
I was in Lanzarote. That was a sore one. That was really painful, particularly when we missed the penalty. And I know you don't want to talk about the League Cup now, but I'm just going to make the point that coming after the League Cup final, it showed that Lennon hadn't learned any lessons about playing against Rangers in terms of set-up and tactics. Gerrard was getting the better of him. He get the better of him in the League Cup final, even though we won, and he get the better of him that day at Celtic Park as well. And that rang huge alarm bells for me. And I remember being so concerned at that night, because I think we were still on top, but they had games in hand. In theory, if they won the games in hand, they would go above us.
Yes.
And that was a huge game. And getting into the new year, to be honest, I was pretty apprehensive about how it was going to end up.
Yeah, I think they'd closed the gap on us, but my memory of that game, the missed penalty by Ryan Christie, we got a bit of a lucky goal. It was
the missed penalty put a real downer on the place.
Yeah, I think Alan McGregor in his career might have saved 4 or 5 penalties against Celtic, going back to Scott McDonald and Samaras and. There was more to come the following season as well with Edouard, but the Celtic's equaliser was pretty fortuitous. It was a shot by McGregor that hit the arm of Edouard and went in. But both their goals were set up by Barisic, who had a terrific game. And, you know, but the other overlooked feature of that game is that Stephen Davis kicked 2 off the line. Twice Julian had headers which were heading for the net until Davis on the post hooked both of them away. So I think we had enough chances to win the game, but I share Saint's view that Rangers just seemed to be starting to get the measure of us at that time.
That was the famous game which I asked Christy about. That was, remember, he got a retrospective ban for apparently kind of grabbing Morelos by the testicles, you know. No.
You're as weird as you're trying to think of how to put it.
I know, and I was thinking, is it by the short and curlies? Is that what you call it?
Well, Morelos got sent off at the end, didn't he, for diving in the... Was it that game?
I don't recall that, no.
No, you remember he went right through and it was almost a one-on-one.
Is that the one that it was easier to score, but he threw himself to...
He threw himself to the ground and he'd already been booked, which meant that he'd been sent off at Celtic Park twice in the same calendar year because he'd had the incident with Brown the previous season. But at that stage, Morelos is still not scored against Celtic in any of the, probably coming up for 10 clashes. And
it was psychological.
That's right, yes. Because did he not spit on someone going up the tunnel? Was it not something like that he went to spit on someone, and so the immediate, was that not the time when Rangers had DUP Dave, or was it Trainer that was their press guy? That whole confrontational, everything's got to be a battle type of PR that they had, and so immediately they came out with, to change the narrative, they came out with he was racially abused. I think that's what happened. But it was just because he was getting so much grief from the Celtic fans. He went up the tunnel. So we go into the winter break in the league, and it's pretty neck and neck with Rangers. So, but as you've pointed out, Saint, prior to that, we have won another domestic trophy. So this would be our 10th domestic trophy in a row. We'd beaten Dunfermline only after extra time in the League Cup at the start of the campaign. Then we'd comfortably beaten Partick Thistle 5-0. Then we'd had a 5-2 over Hibs in the semi-final, and then the famous final where it was I think there was maybe half the Amazon rainforest was chopped down by your industry, writing about how perhaps the toenail of Brendan Julian was offside for the Celtic goal, and Fraser Foster had a Barcelona level of performance in that tie, saving a penalty for Morelos, because when they get the penalty, it's like, oh, he's finally going to score against us.
10 men as well.
Yeah, and
10 men.
So who wants to start? Andrew, do you want to start about the League Cup campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm right in saying, we talked about Frimpong earlier on. I think I'm right in saying did he not make his debut that night against Partick Thistle, the Dunfermline one was, Celtic were appalling that day. Celtic could actually have lost. Yep. They could have gone out of the competition that day. It was a truly dreadful performance. And it was like, you thought after all this cup run where, they've gone years without losing a cup tie, and they'd never even been taken to extra time in the run. That was the first time in this run of domestic trophies and domestic cup trophies that they'd ever been taken to extra time. But they were so fortunate.
It was just 3 days after the Cluj defeat. So I think there was an element of depression around the place because it was a very poor performance.
The Green Brigade during the Dunfermline game, which was, what date was the Dunfermline game? Was August. So it was around the time of the Champions League. The Green Brigade had a banner. This is how it feels to be Celtic. Downsizing again, as you know. The Celtic board are gambling on 10 in a row.
Oh, yeah.
Celtic.
The Dunfermline game, I share Andrew's sentiments because there was a point in that game I remember thinking, we're in deep trouble here, and I think it was James Forrest that bailed us out.
Yeah,
It was,
And then the two games after that were won very convincingly, 5-0 and 5-2, which led us on to the final.
The Partick Thistle game, significant not just for Frimpong's debut, but also Bayo scored. Look, that must have been one. I think he only. I know he scored a double that was then subsequently taken off him later. Poor guy, because it was 2 own goals. But
I'm just reading the BBC report on the Dunfermline game. Neil Lennon came in for all. So getting back to the point you made earlier, Robert, Neil Lennon came in for all sorts of flack after leaving £10 million worth of new defenders in Christopher Julian and Bolingoli on the bench, with Callum McGregor playing left back. Both this was in Europe. Both started this time, but neither impressed. So then we beat Hibs 5-2. Elianusi gets a double in the semi-final. Brown gets a double, and then the Rangers game.
That semi-final was one of those ones where it started. It seems to happen quite a lot now. It's like a 5:30 kickoff, on a Saturday night, which we weren't really used to prior to the more recent times. But it really made it more of a, maybe people have had a few more scoops or whatever, but the atmospheres are always really good at these kind of late Saturday night games, and Brown got a double and Elianusi got a double. Elianusi was terrific that night. I think he should have got his hat-trick if I remember rightly.
Yep. So on to the final, Robert, saying any particular memories of the run and then that final, apart from Fraser Foster and Brendan Julian.
So I flew back from Singapore that week, and as I say, went to the Hamilton Accies game on a Wednesday night and pitched up for the final. The weather was atrocious. It was cold, it was wet, it was windy, absolutely horrible. And I think we had some team selection problems. Edward wasn't available, Griffiths wasn't available, and we started with Lewis Morgan up front as striker. And right from the off, I think Rangers were all over us. They had a couple of set pieces that Goldson and Hilander put over the bar from corners, which we weren't defending very well. And then Forster pulls out an amazing save to his top left-hand corner from a Ryan Jack shot from 30 yards out. And that's the start. And this is, thereafter the game just develops into almost a duel between Alfredo Morelos, goalless against Celtic in his career, and big Fraser Foster. And I think the stats for the game is that Foster had 9 saves in the game, 7 of them from Morelos. And they weren't easy saves because nearly all of these chances were almost point blank range. Maybe some were from angles, but incredible. You have to say our defence must have been shocking to allow an opposition striker so many clear sights at goal. And I think our midfield just didn't play. So first half was terrible. We could have been 3 or 4 down. I think at half-time, Neil Lennon took off Morgan. I think he took off Elianusi as well. And Edward was thrown on. Yep. Maybe not fit. I think
he wasn't fit, and he was clearly
Johnson
not fit.
Got thrown on as well. And, unbelievably, we score first. I think Christie slings a free kick in from the left. Julian volleys it in. If it went to VAR today, it might have been disallowed. But, the goal was given. And then 2 or 3 minutes later, just as we've got something to hang on to, Jeremy Frimpong bundles Morelos to the ground, and penalty to Rangers, red card Frimpong, and Tavernier doesn't step up to take the penalty. So, Morelos, who's already missed by that stage probably 4 decent chances, steps up. Not a good penalty, low and hard, but too straight. Big Fraser saves it again. So it was... And then I think after that, after we went down to 10 men, my recollections were, okay, it was still a siege, but they didn't make so many chances. I think we brought on Beaton and Ayer went to right back, and we were a bit more comfortable than we'd been in the first half. And it would have been more comfortable because Mikey Johnson missed a sitter. Edward put him through one-on-one.
Yeah.
And I think he slipped just as he was about to shoot, and he put it past the post. And I remember sitting there in the south stand, and there was a bloke to my left, and he stood up with about 10 minutes to go. He says, "I can't take any more of this stress."
It was me.
And he left. I don't know whether he just went to the kind of lounge area downstairs or whether... He said, and I was sitting there, I was shaking a bit with the cold, but I was definitely having heart palpitations as well. I was really, really stressed out for that last 15 minutes. They had one other great chance at the end when Morelos hit an angled shot that went just past the post. I think it emerged after the game that Johnny Hayes, who was playing left back, had actually fractured his leg and played on. So the commitment was unbelievable. And the other great memory, I think, was there were about 60 seconds to go. Fraser Forster's sitting down in the penalty area and he's getting treatment for some injury, real or imagined. And literally a minute later, he sprints the length of the field to join in the celebrations with the players. And it was one of the great celebrations. You know, the players went ballistic at the final whistle. I think they realised they'd been outplayed. Somehow they'd survived. And I was thinking about it. I think a couple of weeks later, I was at a dinner and Neil Lennon was at the dinner. He was at the same table. And I said to him, I've been watching Celtic in cup finals since the mid-60s. So I don't know how many cup finals that is, 60, 70 cup finals. Mm-hmm. But apart from Lisbon itself, that League Cup win, the Fraser Forster Cup final, is one of my favourites because of the manner in which it was won. We're not used to winning cups because of a sensational goalkeeping performance.
Yeah.
And it's usually because we've got great strikers and we win these games. And so it was a very sort of unique occasion, the manner in which we won it, just the absolute excellence of Forster, and a real sickener for Rangers.
Celtic always have to, they say the best team wins. Celtic always have to be the better team to win in cup finals. As you say, that they never sneak. They never kind of steal cup finals, as people said that one. So that was so unusual, so rare. But of course, it also spawned so many memes with it. Oh my days, post-match frimpong. I remember him saying, he said, how would you have felt? I think they were saying to him, God, and they were lucky that they missed the penalty, and he went, oh my days, it was about the fact that all his actions didn't cost Celtic the final.
But it was during a period where, we're just about to get on to the Europa League. So if the beginning of the season, the Dunfermline game at the start of the League Cup campaign were on a downer because European football has such an impact on our domestic football and we'd get knocked out by Cluj. This period of getting to the League Cup final was we were winning every week in the league and we had an incredible Europa League run, which we'll touch on in a second. So I suppose it just demonstrates how Europe can have such an impact sometimes on domestic form in terms of the mood music it creates around the club. Any memories about the cup final, Saint?
Sad to say, it's the only cup final I've never got a ticket for.
Right.
So that's the watching it in telly, but it was a sort of new experience. But I've got to say, if Robert's pint's half full, my pint's half empty, because I was so angry after the game that how badly we'd played. And I know that maybe you had to be there to appreciate it a wee bit more, but certainly watching it on TV, it was horrendous. And, you know, the problem that day was we got over in the midfield and he did nothing to change it. You know, Brown and McGregor, great players, but for whatever reason, whether they were outnumbered or it was different formations or whatever, I can't quite recall. But I remember shouting at the telly, get another midfield player on, you know, bolster the midfield, because they're just cutting right through us, and the defence was laid exposed time and time and time again. And then, you know, as the game went on and you get into the last 10 minutes, there's always that wee thing, you know, I think we're going to be all right here now. But to this day, I didn't find that an enjoyable experience. Maybe it was a wee bit of the, you know, I don't have any divine right to get a ticket by any manner of means, but I think maybe I was in a wee bit of a huff because I didn't get a ticket.
Yeah.
And
So you went into it with a negative frame of mind because you're just in a bad mood about not having...
I was okay during the game, right? Because I wanted to win at all costs. Whether I'm there or not is irrelevant. I want Celtic to win. So I was happy with the outcome. But it was just the nature of how we played. And I also think that game had a lasting effect into what was to happen the next year, because it gave them hope. That, you know, the Rangers fans that I know were saying after that game, you know, we're as good as usual. And but this time you can't really deny it, because if Bain is at Celtic Park, I think it was December the 8th. No, sorry, December the 8th was the final. Mm-hmm. And then they beat us at Celtic Park on December the 29th. Mm-hmm. So there is that sort of like gradual realisation that we're not as far in front of them as we should be here because of our resources, finance, infrastructure and all the other things that have served as well. And I've got to say as well, I am now thinking at this point that Lennon's maybe not the man that I was hoping for.
So we've secured our 10th trophy, and the winter break's on in the league. So I'll go back to Europe, where in the Europa League, this was fantastic. We are 1-1 away against Rennes, penalty each. We beat Cluj 2-0 pretty comfortably, demonstrating the issue with the Champions League qualifying. We then have the incredible night of beating Lazio 2-1, which one of the things I remember actually about that game was the walk home and being absolutely soaked to death. It was absolutely lashing it down that night. Brendan, I keep calling Brendan, Christopher Julian gets it. And then we have the return game. It's one of those ones where you home away in the middle of the group stages. We have the return game with the fantastic Incham winner. So we have a late winner against them at Celtic Park with Christopher Julian getting in the 89th minute and then Incham in the 95th minute. We then beat Rennes 3-1 at Celtic Park. So that when we go to Cluj, we've won the group already. The group's tied up and we've won it. Incredibly, we've won it. I suppose, Andrew, one of those things is this gave power to the elbow of those people who were starting to say, we're a Europa League team. Actually, playing, if we could get in the group stages of the Champions League, finish third and drop into the Europa League, that's our level. And winning that Europa League group sort of gave power to the elbow. Do you remember much about that campaign?
Oh, hugely. Yeah, I remember, as I say, people were saying, Lenny Ball works in Europe. Unlike Rodgers, Lenny Ball works in Europe. Because obviously this is the last guy to take the club to the last 16 of the Champions League. So there is something about his approach in terms of European games. I mean, it was very much, I got in trouble. I got a phone call I was writing a follow-up piece about when Celtic won, and that's the first time they'd ever won in Italy, of course. Yeah, because they're now the only kind of major one of the big five they've never won in remains Germany. That remains the final frontier in terms of their kind of European, in terms of the big powers. But that win in Italy was, I remember I was actually reading, I don't know if it came up on a Twitter feed the other day or something. I said it was, you know, because the Lazio fans and their kind of love of Mussolini and all this kind of stuff, and they were saying how poetic that a black Muslim man put them to the sword, in the 95th minute, and did his famous, like a somersault and kind of like acrobatic kind of celebration. But the win, I mean, that you thought they were capable, you thought they could do something like this because of what happened in the home game, because they'd come back from a goal down this second half, and the Julian header with a minute to go. That was just another one of those glorious nights, and it was a comeback against. They were a good team. Lazio were a good team. Celtic had no right to beat them home and away, and of course, so it became the one and only time they've ever won a European group, or finished top of a European group. That's it.
Lennon deserves credit for that, because that's a hard thing, no matter what level it is,
Yep.
whether it's the Champions League, Europa League, whatever it is, to finish top of a European group, and to be the only Celtic manager to do it, is a string to his bow.
And I think we, across the season, we played 8 away games in Europe, and the only one that we lost was the dead rubber to Cluj the second time around. So
where he played a kind of odds and sods of a team, didn't he? He kind of rested quite a few people that night, as he was right to do.
He made his debut that night, and he looked no bad actually. I never saw him again. So.
Who was that? Sorry,
Scott Robertson.
Yeah. He did well that night.
My other memory that I think got to mention is in the Lazio game at home, that they would have equalised in added on time. Some bloke hit a rocket that was going in the top left-hand corner, and Forster pulled out an unbelievable save. See if you can find it on YouTube. It's better than any of his saves against Rangers, actually.
Yeah, no, I remember it. It was incredible.
I think it was Lazzari again that hit it, and it was just goal screaming all the way until Big Fraser got up there. And so, yeah, marvellous.
He made a couple of huge saves. He made a couple of huge saves in Rome as well. This is like Neil Lennon's mantra. If you want to win these games, your keeper has to play well. And Foster used to give a kind of he was the ultimate kind of demonstration of that.
Yeah, and I think if we'd had Forster, if we'd signed him a little bit earlier, maybe he would have played against Cluj in the qualifiers, and things would have been different. But I suspect that we still had Scott Bain and Craig Gordon, and maybe Bain's performance against Cluj was more the trigger for going after Forster again.
Ironically enough, Bain's still there in the present day, which I find absolutely incredulous.
Yeah,
that he's been here for so long. That takes a bit.
Good luck to him. He's a good guy. He's picking up wages he wouldn't have picked
Nothing
up.
personal against him. It's just the fact that he's fairly mediocre, and he's never really filled anybody.
Well, you say he's fairly mediocre. I've always thought if he left Celtic and went to Hibs, he'd be Hibs' first team goalkeeper, and he'd be in the Scotland squad. Probably, yeah. But so we win the group and we get Copenhagen. Now, the Copenhagen issue is starting to be around the time that we're starting to know about COVID when we draw Copenhagen, because there starts to be debate about events round about the time of the Copenhagen tie. Because was it not when we had Copenhagen at home that Liverpool played someone?
Atalanta, was it? Or
at Anfield, and there was a whole raft of COVID deaths that were linked to that game at Anfield. That game. But so I went to Copenhagen, and that whole Copenhagen tie is really odd to me, because that's a game that at half time we were discussing why we weren't 3 or 4 goals up.
Yeah.
In the first leg away, we had some really good chances in the first 10. I remember having some really good chances the first 10, 15 minutes. And by half time thinking, we should be 2-3 up. But second half, we'll come back out. We'll maybe get another goal. We'll comfortably go, and then we'll get them back to Celtic Park. We're looking at the last 8 of a European competition here. That's what I remember thinking. And then second half was as one-sided in favour of Copenhagen as the first half had been. And then, of course, we blew it in the return leg at Celtic Park.
Who was the striker up front? I think it was a big black guy, right? He looked like a big donkey, and he scored.
Ndoye, he scored in both games, I think.
Yeah,
but
he was...
Well, we got suckered in the return game because we got back to 1 each.
Yeah.
With 5 minutes to go, a penalty by Edward, and then I think we chased the winner and we got caught twice just on the break, on the counter. So it was a bit naive, just...
Yeah, we get a penalty in the 83rd minute and they score 85 and 88.
Yeah, I know, crappy
it was
goals. But,
yeah.
And your mind was immediately kind of spinning back to Cluj, because that ending, they had great endings and terrible endings in Europe that season,
That's it. Yes,
It was
they
like
were all
really
unexpected, one way or the other.
I know.
What date was the Copenhagen game? Was it end of February?
February, yeah.
February 27th.
Yeah, it was the end of February because it was just before. So, I mean, it was Simonovic was in the team, and I think Aya played right back, and Taylor was at left back, and it was just this was in the return leg. It was just So it was 27th of February. So it was just
one week before
as we were
Did
starting to
Rogic
get.
don't sell the jerseys for the second goal? I've visioned him being in midfield, and he did something absolutely crazy, and he lost possession, and it led to them scoring from that mistake.
Yeah, I thought it was Ayer or somebody made
Well,
a terrible mistake.
Simonovic made a mistake for one of their goals.
Right.
It was either second
But
or
he
third
hardly
goal.
played that season.
I know,
Jozo.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
we were out of Europe, and I think that had put a downer on things, but not so bad, because we came back after the winter break and we hit the ground running. And this was in that period when Rangers were coming back after the winter break and just completely and utterly imploding, and that their form would just go completely downhill. Because when we get to the end of the season, when there was the debate about calling the season, you were saying, well, we'd need to be absolutely atrocious for these remaining games, and they'd suddenly need to turn into Brazil 1970 to do it. Although people always say Brazil 1970, best team I always saw was Brazil 82. Yeah,
82 team.
They didn't win it.
I know, but they were still the best
team ever.
It's still the best team ever.
I think we came back after the winter break and we won every league game except Livy away. We nearly lost again at Livingston, and Rogic scored in added on time, so it felt like a victory.
But did they not lose?
Imploded.
They lost that night at Ibrox.
Hamilton. Because you see the famous...
I remember
there's a famous clip.
I was at the Livingston game, and the atmosphere at the end of the game was just incredible, because we'd scored the last minute equaliser and then they'd go and lose, and it was just...
And they'd already lost at Tynecastle after being a goal up. And then they lost at Rugby Park after being a goal up. And then they lost again at Tynecastle in the Scottish Cup.
Yeah.
Scottish Cup.
And there was a couple of draws. I think there was a draw against St Johnstone or something. So their form over that 10 league games that they played, they only won 5 of them. Whereas I think we'd won 8 out of 9 or 9 out of 10.
Yeah.
And I think when it came to calling the season, somebody engaged some mathematicians to understand the probability of Celtic winning the league. And, they fed, recent form and blah, blah, blah into the equation. And it was 99.6% that Celtic were going to go on and win the league, because we were a form team. They were still in Europe, but I think maybe the last game they played was they lost to Leverkusen. And then they didn't play the second leg for about 5 months later. So we were, mathematically it was
13
possible.
Points. 13 points.
13 points, 8 games to go for us, 9 for them.
Rangers had a game in hand. And Celtic...
And I think the only precedent of teams collapsing. So Rangers had a big lead in 2008 when the year they got to the UEFA Cup final, I think about 10 points over Strachan Celtic, but we beat them twice at Parkhead and in the run-in, and we clawed it back and won it on the last night at Tannadice. And the other collapse, which still hurts me, is 1980 when we were about 10, 11 points ahead of Aberdeen.
That's a sore point. So.
And Aberdeen came to Parkhead and won twice. So, yeah, so there was a arithmetical possibility that Rangers
there is a precedent.
could have pulled it
There
back.
is a precedent, but it's very unlikely.
Yeah.
But it was very unlikely based on our form and based on their form.
So the thing,
in fact, Gerrard could have been fired.
Well, so that's what I was going to speak to Andrew about. I was going to talk first of all about the run up to lockdown. So you had it before we did. You had lockdowns in Singapore before we did. And the reason why that sticks in my head is a friend of mine, their brother was in Singapore, and he's saying, stock up on toilet paper, stock up on Nurofen and aspirin, and stock up on, go out and buy loads of face masks and get everything you can because this is coming. But it still seemed we were nowhere near talking about it. I remember HSS hire shop stuff. I remember going in there to get, it was a dehumidifier or something for something to do with work. I remember going in and they had these packs on sale, special offer on sale and it was a pack of gloves, a face mask, and something else. And I went and I said, I'll buy that whole basket of stuff. And the guy's like, why? I was like, well, because this, I don't know why you're selling these off at a discount. Because you're going to be out of, I've got a friend overseas and you're going to be out of stock of these in ages. He's like, why? I said, COVID. And in terms of people don't pay attention to the news, I remember the guy saying, what's that? It was a young guy working in there. But if you remember, Andrew, this was in the period where Boris was wanting.
He was still shaking hands in people in hospitals and all that. It was because, remember, we get told not to shake hands and such, like not to have close contact.
And the hospitality industry was going mental because we were being told not to go to pubs, restaurants and cinemas, but he wasn't going to lock it down. So they were going mental saying, if you lock it down, we can claim in the insurance. What you're doing just now is just killing us. So there was still a lot of debate about whether we were going to play Rangers. We were due to go to Ibrox. And if you remember, Scottish Government were still saying, yeah, it'll be okay. I think on the Wednesday or the Thursday before the game.
It was the Friday. The game was a Sunday.
The game was a Sunday because Rangers played Leverkusen.
That's right, the game was
on the Thursday at Ibrox.
Yeah, so they played on the Thursday.
But the SNP the government allowed some huge conference to take place, and they allowed a rugby match, one of the rugby internationals.
Remember, and the Cheltenham as well, that during that week, they said that was
the Cheltenham Festival.
Yeah, COVID spreader as well. But we were driving up to Lennoxtown for the the pre-match when we heard that the game was off. So, and Celtic said, no, still come along and we'll do some press with you, which was really decent of them. And we got Christie that day for the Sundays, and we got Lennon both of them talk so eloquently, because the two of them are really good talkers, really good, really thoughtful kind of guys when it comes to this kind of stuff. And they were talking about, God, I don't know when we'll see, like Lennon was talking, I remember Neil Lennon was talking, he said, God, I don't know when we'll see football again. He said, but I know we'll miss it. And we all
did. Yourself, you were adamant in the days leading up to that game is never going to be on.
Yeah.
And our friends on the WhatsApp chat are saying, well, where's the evidence of this? Because the government are giving no indication. Everything's still normal as it can be. And again, always recall it, you were adamant that game isn't taking place. I will guarantee you can put money in the bookies. That game will not be starting, and sure enough.
Yeah, I think it suited Rangers for the game to be off.
Yeah.
Because they'd had the European game on the Thursday night, and we were flying. We'd beaten St Mirren 5-0 in our last league game the week before the match against Rangers. And, you could imagine if we'd gone to Ibrox and won and gone 16 points clear, they were just in such a poor vein of form that would Steven Gerrard have survived?
I don't think so.
I don't think
season
so.
If we'd won the league by 20 points.
And that's my question for you. Two questions for you, Andrew, about all of this. Number one is, you guys in the press, were you getting interaction with the Scottish Government? Or were you being treated you're sports guys, so nobody's speaking to you about this? And then the second one is, Rangers fans have now painted this mythology of, well, we got the league called early. We put pressure on the league for the league to be called early, and that was great for us because we secured it. Ignoring the fact that Gerrard would have been, I'm pretty sure Gerrard would have been fired.
Gerrard would have been fired. I mean, I've written about this and I've got such kickback for Rangers supporters. They really did. I mean, the problem was I was on their side because I didn't think the league should have been called. I think Scotland should have done what England did. And to be honest with you, and Celtic did push for that unnecessarily. They pushed for the league to get called because I think Peter Lawwell's panic was that because in the Netherlands they voided that champion. They voided the championship. There wasn't a league winner that season. There wasn't, but that was only because there was a couple of points separating teams at the top. I can understand it was different, but I didn't also like to see Thistle and Hearts. I didn't like to see teams relegated on the basis of there was still 8 games of the season to go, and I didn't see any.
I think
reason.
Was it not about money? And was it not about money that all the teams were going to lose? They were all going to lose revenue, and
he made all
calling
that
the league early meant the prize money could be paid out early.
No, but they could have paid it out anyway. They paid out Gretna's prize money because they knew they just wanted to prop up Gretna. It was like El Cid, when he's dead and they still prop him up in the horse. They propped up Gretna just because they didn't want them to really cause havoc with their fixture list. If Gretna went down 4 or 5 weeks before the end of the season, then all their games, what happens to all their games? And then people say, but we played a team, and then these guys are getting their 3-0 wins. That's why they did it. But it was just a typical bullshit from Doncaster. It was the same bullshit he gave us about Armageddon and all that, like all these teams would go under if there wasn't a Rangers. When he wants to get something, he shows you the edge of the precipice. He overplays his hand. Because I wrote damning pieces of him and Murdoch McLennan, who was never speaking to us, wouldn't speak to us on the record. I mean, I phoned up the SPFL 2 weeks before it. I says, what are you going to do about this season, about the fact lockdown's coming? And the guy said, what do you mean lockdown's coming? I said, have you seen Italy? Seen the number of deaths today in Italy? He said, that's Italy. I said, if it's in Italy, it's coming here in a couple of weeks. He said, oh, there's no plans in place. They just, again, they didn't want to think. What they should have done, and to my mind, Celtic would have won 10 in a row if I was the Celtic CEO, because I would have said, yeah, we'll finish this season when we can finish this season. And if next season has to be somewhat abridged, we only play each other twice or something like that, because we maybe don't have the time, or we need to play each other 3 times, we don't do a post-split. You finish the competition you're in. This is what England did. And then you start your next one. Because see if Celtic and Rangers had come back and it was like finishing this season, what would have been the joy for Rangers trying to claw back a third? They were never going to claw back. Trying to claw back a 13-point deficit. It would have put them in a downer.
Was the other problem for Scottish football a problem that English football doesn't have? Our champions are playing Champions League qualifiers in July.
Oh, no. Well, no, what you could do, what other countries did was you call it, you say, what we've got just now, the placings we have just now decide what our European entrants are. But we play the season, we play this championship to a finish as soon as we can. Because obviously, that wasn't just a problem for Scotland.
The counter to that would be, the simple thing is, call the season, declare what everybody is, start the new season afresh. You'd no idea when this is going to restart. And if you then start with convoluted things of this season finishes in October next season, and you're then having to try and find a way to do something with the following season, and then you've got the Champions League that you're having to do, because what if a team is overtaken, and so you've got a team playing Champions League qualifiers who aren't the champions? Is it not a cleaner, more straightforward thing to say, look, we've no idea when this is going to start up again, so let's just call it. And then we don't have to come up with 50,000 alternative scenarios as to how we take it forward.
Did they not vote on it? Did they not vote to call it?
Aye, they voted to call it because, again, he emotionally blackmailed them. Doncaster presented them with all these figures and all this. Oh, we're going to lose 3 clubs during this lockdown period and all this. Never lost anybody. See, as soon as they brought in furlough, actually these clubs in clover. These clubs were in better shape when they didn't have to put on games. All the lower league teams, because lower league teams putting on games, it cost them money. As soon as they weren't playing football, but their wages were getting paid for their players and their staff, they were in the best shape they'd been in years. So we were never going to lose clubs. As soon as furlough came in, and I told, I spoke to SFA people. I said, if this furlough's coming in, I did a piece about it. I think it was my first. I said, everything's fine. Everything's fine. We don't need to do this. It was. But then, what I'm saying is, this cost Celtic 10 in a row. The Celtic pushed for this, because if Celtic had come back and played those games and maybe won 20 by 20 points, every possibility, and if they weren't quite right as they come back not quite right, then they'd time to tune up. They'd those 8 games to tune up and get it right for the season that really mattered, because they knew they'd won this one. If Celtic,
but then one of the other challenges based on one of the other things you need to chuck into this mix is Peter Lawwell is Mr. The shit is about to hit the fan always. He is always preparing for, I mean, our whole structure around how we prepared for the Champions League was a self-fulfilling prophecy in Peterland, because Peter's strategy was, if I spend money on players and we fail to qualify for the Champions League, we're stuffed. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to sign players so that if we don't qualify, so it became his financial management strategy on risk, I always felt was a bit self-fulfilling prophecy, in that I'm going to prepare for the ultimate worst-case scenario, and then when the ultimate worst-case scenario happened, he could turn around and say, see, good job, I prepared for it, without ever thinking through, maybe your preparation for it is what brought it on in the first place. So you've got a very conservative lawyer running the league and a very conservative accountant running the biggest club, and those two are looking at a set of scenarios where I always think it's so much easier to look back now and go, well, see, it was always going to be okay. But nobody had any idea when this was going to end. So if you are an ultra-conservative decision maker, as Peter is, and you are a very conservative lawyer, as Doncaster appears to be, then that's going to cloud your perception as to the best case scenario here, because your best case scenario is it's an absolute disaster and it's going to be the end of the world.
But if you're saying what about European places and all that, if you don't think football's coming back, then you're not playing in Europe anyway. Celtic were
but they do think football's going to come back. They've just no idea when it's going to come back. And you know, I know from speaking to people in Celtic at the time, the general consensus was that football might come back in about 9 months' time, so that football would come back halfway through what ended up being the 10 in a row season.
I think when the league was called in Scotland, I don't think anybody envisaged that the English Premier League was going to resume in, I think it was late July or something like that, and they had to delay the start of their season into September. You know, obviously they had the money, they had the resources, all the testing protocols, and so they were almost like the first adopters of what would be the new protocols for playing football in a closed door scenario. But apart from the English Premier League and the Champions League, which also got delayed and then got played to a different type of finish, I think it wasn't a 2-leg affair, and they played all the final matches, you know, in 1 week in one city. But did any other leagues also complete their season, or nearly everybody? My recollection is that nearly every country called it.
No, did Italy or whatever? I thought did they not come back?
I think most countries called it.
Void.
The Dutch voided it, and most countries called it. Because they didn't, and the other thing you have to
too much uncertainty.
The other thing you have to chuck into the mix, which had an impact here, the government that's pushing things forward in England. I know it's the UK government, but they're based in England, and it very much felt like two separate governments during this time. They're populists and free marketeers who never wanted a lockdown in the first place, and fully appreciated that the quicker they can get something that the people normality, so the quicker we can get football back on, the better. Whereas in Scotland we have a political class who hate football fans because we are dirty down market people and they wish we were better than we were. So you've got two really opposing cultures of political classes that's also driving things forward, which might also explain why the Premiership finished.
You say all that, but there was about 2-week difference in terms of when the two leagues come back, when the two football and setups come back.
Yeah, the point we're making is, we know that now. Nobody knew that back then. Although the irony is, we did carry one competition forward, because the one competition that we haven't talked about is the Scottish Cup. And I've been debating in my head whether to do the Scottish Cup in this season or whether to do the Scottish Cup of this season and next season. And I think it's probably better to discuss it in next season because of how the team performed in that season. And that was the other thing that I remember having a conversation with Peter, that he felt it was far too complicated to carry a season on. And the other thing you've got to remember that the other thing you've got to remember that complicates things in Scotland for the leagues out with the top flight, they are all on contracts that finish on the last day of the season, and it's the date of the last day of the season. So you have problems of teams would have been competing in this season's league with completely different players. They would have played out the last 8-9 games with a completely different squad of players, because in the leagues below the top flight, they virtually have an annual turnover of players. I remember somebody connected with one of the lesser clubs saying that the first season of playoffs in Scottish football completely stuffed the teams because the playoff games were happening at the end of the players' contracts. The players' contracts finished and then they were playing these playoff finals because nobody had thought through about the fact that so they were having to beg players to come and play when their contracts were finished. So players were saying, I'll play for £1,000 and all that type of stuff. So there is also the complication.
But also, you say about the vote, but also remember the vote. Also remember the farrago of a vote. I'll never forget that Friday night. Look at the Dundee's magic vote, that it went into the spam. Dundee voted a certain way. Dundee voted in a certain way, it would have brought down the whole league getting called. If Dundee's original vote had been accepted and cast at the time, then the vote would not have passed about voiding the league. But bizarrely, by the time they phoned up, they were nobbled somehow. They phoned up and said they'd changed their mind, and it's like, it's just as well, because we didn't actually take your vote because we haven't found your vote. And it turned out it was in a spam folder. I mean, this is league governance. This is league governance.
I mean, that's one of those ones where I'm pretty sure none of that argument would have held up in a court of law. If anybody had gone to court, proved that it went into a spam, I suppose the counter would be prove it didn't go into a spam folder, because I've now taken it out of the spam folder. But you would I'm sure IT people were working.
They had an inquiry. They had was it Deloitte carried out a kind of investigation and said that.
That's right. They did do an audit.
They did an audit. What a piece of nonsense! But
so we finished that. The season's called, and we have won 9 in a row. And the only thing about it is, I remember Celtic organising an online party for fans to see the club getting the 9th title, and it was a bit rubbish. Yeah. And there is a part of me that still thinks we didn't do what I'm about to suggest because of the way the 10th season went. But there is an element of me says we never celebrated really as a fan base. We never got to celebrate that we did that amazing thing of winning 9 consecutive titles. And then as a fan base, we never, we'll obviously describe it in more detail. We never got to celebrate the quadruple treble in the same way. And I always felt when we came back, I felt when we came back, that's something we could have done to try and give a lift to the place, because Rangers had just won the title. Mm-hmm. That we maybe should have made more of the fact that we'd won the 9th title when nobody was there, and the quadruple treble.
I don't know whether this comment's for now or for the next episode, but the quadruple treble is one of the greatest achievements in the history of the club. I mean, it is absolutely incredible, and it should be celebrated.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, there should be merchandise related to it. There should be, you know, just like that, the artist did that fantastic Lisbon Lion, you know, the Glittering Prize piece of art, which is beautiful, to celebrate, you know, when the 50-year anniversary of Lisbon came out. And we should be doing something for this period of utter dominance in Scottish football. And, you know, the key parties that contributed the most, the Scott Browns, James Forrest, Callum McGregor,
Well, I suppose
Neil Lennon, right?
Yeah.
Is it a case, though, that the reason it didn't really get celebrated was because of the sociological fact of the country, that people were dying?
Oh, I know why we didn't celebrate it at the time. I always felt when we came back, we should have celebrated it. Even more so because there was such a downer of the fact that we'd blown the 10. I thought when we came back, we should have then gone and celebrated it.
Even when Ange took over, it was still a mostly empty stadium for the first few home games, at least.
Right.
So, you know, it was a dreadful time for the whole country, and the fact that there was any football, even closed doors, was quite fascinating, actually.
We were about to get used to the closed doors aspect.
We were, and we'll touch on that. Actually, one of the benefits of it is I found not a single moment of that season memorable because you were just watching it.
Same.
Or online or whatever. So, before we closed down the 9th in a row, we didn't know it was going to be the 9th in a row at that point. We were actually we then start recording the first 9 in a row Chronicles, us three with Lackey Moore. So before we close off this season, any particular memories of that 9 in a row period, Andrew?
I suppose it was such a bizarre 9 in a row, let's be honest about it. No having a rival, Rangers, you know, for the first part of it. And then by the end of it, not having to play to confirm yourselves as a 9th title winners. Not actually not having that moment on the pitch where you've, as you say, you've completed 9 in a row, and all that emotion was strained out it. And there was a lot of emotion strained out the early, and in between times you have this invincible treble, and it was just an incredible season that like in the middle of it, almost right in the middle of it. What a strange 9 consecutive titles.
It was. You guys?
Yeah, I think it's very different from the first 9 in a row, which was during a period where Scottish club football was very, very strong, and we had a number of teams doing well in Europe, and, you know, Rangers reached 2 European finals, a couple of European semi-finals. So, and I think it was very different to Rangers' 9 in a row, which was pretty dominant. You know, Celtic came 5th, I think, a couple of seasons. But I think, you know, for me, you know, when we look at this 9 in a row, you know, the first 5 seasons, we didn't win any trebles. In fact, we were struggling to win cups. But as soon as Rangers came back up to the top league, we won everything. We won every trophy. And, you know, that was really pleasing, was that we were able to find another level which hadn't been necessary maybe in the Ronnie Dyler years.
I think that point is almost what makes the 9, because Rangers fans would have always then come back and said, I will see your 9. We weren't there for half of it. But I actually see the fact that there was a Rangers for the period when we were most dominant and we were winning those trebles.
That's the sweetest element.
That's what then makes that 9 in a row for me. That's what really makes it, because they don't have. They could turn around and go, well, we went there. And seeing the period when you weren't there, we won the league. But seeing the period where you were there, we actually won even more.
Yeah.
You got any specific memories, Steve?
2 seasons that jump out, obviously, out of the 11-12 season when we were behind, and then you've got the Kilmarnock game that Welling's on the precipice, leads up to New Year, and then when we beat them at the New Year, you know, maybe not at the time certainly, but in hindsight now that you know, we were going to go and win it. And then the momentous day, Valentine's Day, but when they went into administration. And then the other season as well was Rodgers' the Invincible season, because, you know, I never thought in my lifetime that a Celtic team could go unbeaten through it. I didn't think any team could do it. It's been done twice. I mean, fairness to Rangers, they did it the following season we're about to discuss. But I never thought that would be possible. And I also think that we're in the shout of doing it again this season.
And you see in our draw with Aberdeen, by the time this goes out, we may have dropped points or whatever again. But you see in the draw with Aberdeen, as we were recording this, it was recent. The incredible thing about it, and you've seen this weekend as we record this, bad refereeing decisions, a shot ballooning off somebody's backside and going into the top, you know, a deflected shot, a lapse of concentration. There are so many reasons why achieving an invincible season is just so difficult. Because you just need a day when you hit the post, you hit the bar, everybody up front's having an off day, you get a goal chopped off that shouldn't be chopped off, and then somebody takes a shot from 30 yards, hits somebody's backside and goes in the opposite corner, and bang, your invincible season's
I think the most
gone.
incredible thing about the Invincible season was it 4 draws, 5 draws?
4
draws.
And out of the 4 draws, there weren't any games that we looked as if we were going to lose. If anything, we can look at the 4 games and go, we should have won them.
Yeah.
So technically, we could have won every game.
The Partick Thistle game, that midweek one, they'd really...
Celtic Park?
They nearly lost that night. That was as close as it came to not being an invincible treble season. Otherwise, as you say, Steve, 46 games, they never looked like losing. Never looked like losing.
So that's 9 in a row. The next episode and the final episode, we will complete the quadruple treble, and we will then have an awful time.
Therapy.
Yeah. We're going to have a cathartic episode. So with that, we will say goodbye, and to everybody, we'll be recording this again in about 45 minutes.
Bring me sunshine in your smile.
That is the second 9 in a row Chronicles. It's out every Sunday between now and Christmas, and if you listen to this in the future, that's Christmas 2024. Thank you for the ongoing support that you provide to the Celtic Underground that enables us to continue to produce this fantastically high level of content. Once we've finished with the 9 in a row Chronicles, there'll be more series that we'll be producing that will be out on a Sunday for you to listen to through the course of the week. Anyway, enough of me. Myself, St Anthony, Robert, Andrew will all be back next week for the next instalment of the second 9 in a row Chronicles.
Bring me sunshine, bring me love. Bring me sunshine in your smile. Bring me laughter all the while. In this world where we live, there should be more happiness. So much joy you can give to each brand new bright tomorrow. Make me happy through the years. Never bring me any tears. Let your arms be as warm as the sun from up above. Bring me fun, bring me sunshine, bring me love, sweet love. Bring me fun, bring me sunshine, bring me